Meghan, you're talking bullshit.
Will we get to see you back in Australia soon, Meghan? Oh gosh, we'd love to come back. It's brilliant here.
They're both lying. They're both lying to the Australian people and the world. That is the only conclusion.
Australia. For many people following the royal story, this tour was expected to be a controlled series of public appearances, speeches, walkabouts, and carefully managed media moments designed to present a specific image on the global stage.
Sussexes soap opera has rolled into town. Mr. and Mrs. Grifter are here. And for what purpose? Because the last time they came, which was back in 2018, right, they said that this was the catalyst.
But once the footage, speeches, and interviews from that period started circulating more widely, the conversation around it began to shift. Not because of one single moment, but because of several that started being placed next to each other. And at the center of that entire discussion is one statement that quickly went viral. So let's start from this one. During a public appearance in Australia, Meghan Markle told students that she had been bullied and attacked every single day for 10 years, and described herself as the most trolled person in the world.
Every day for 10 years, I have been bullied and attacked, and I was the most trolled person in the entire world, man or woman. I'm still here.
That line spread almost instantly. Clips of it appeared across social media, commentary channels, and news discussions within hours. And once it left the original setting, it became one of the most debated quotes from the entire tour.
Meghan, you're talking bullshit. We all know it. You have literally driven people into therapy, into rehab, because of your bullying of them. You bullied the late Queen. You bullied Catherine. So zip it.
Because people didn't just hear it once. They replayed it, clipped it, slowed it down, and compared it to other moments from different interviews and appearances. And that's where the discussion really started to split. On one side, supporters viewed the statement as an emotional summary of long-term online pressure. From that perspective, it fits into a broader pattern of public figures describing the impact of sustained criticism and digital harassment.
Meghan's doing what she does best, making everything about herself. Everything. Everything relates to her. But back to me. Enough about me. What do you think of me? While speaking to youth at a mental health organization, she complained about her struggles.
But on the other side, critics focused on the wording itself. Not the emotion behind it, but the absolute framing of it. Most trolled person in the world. That specific phrase raised immediate questions in online discussions.
And she, on a daily basis, trolls us.
Not necessarily emotional reactions, but comparative ones. Compared to who? Based on what metric? And how does that statement align with other public figures who also face large-scale online attention? And once those questions appeared, the conversation expanded beyond that one speech, because the Australian tour included multiple public engagements, not just one appearance.
The official organisers tagged Sussex Royal into the official post. Now remember, Harry and Meghan have not used Sussex Royal since they were royal. With the Royal News Network posting, these people know that Sussex Royal Instagram is no longer controlled by Harry and Meghan. Tagging with the Sussex Royal line is just bizarre. But I think it is absolutely planned.
In different events, Meghan and Harry both participated in discussions centered around mental health, online environments, and public pressure. These topics were repeated across multiple appearances, giving the tour a consistent thematic focus.
If you know anything about the truth of Meghan Markle, you know that this is a performance, it is highly scripted, and it is totally disingenuous.
At one point, Meghan spoke about the emotional impact of online negativity and how digital spaces can amplify criticism in ways that affect mental well-being over time.
Continue to be who and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness, and to allow humor to lighten the burden of your tender heart.
That message itself is not unusual. Many public figures, especially in recent years, have spoken about similar experiences with social media pressure and public scrutiny. But what made this particular moment stand out in wider discussion was not the topic itself. It was how it was later placed alongside other parts of the tour.
From a woman who has attending her best life this week in Australia, one of her internet trolls, who to this day says that Catherine, the Princess of Wales, faked her cancer.
Because while those speeches focused on mental health and online behavior, other parts of the tour were highly visual and widely circulated. Public walkabouts, staged appearances, and structured interactions with attendees were all captured and shared extensively online. And in many cases, these moments didn't circulate as full segments. They circulated as short clips. 10 seconds here, a short interaction there, a single sentence taken from a longer speech. And once that happens, something important changes.
Then we saw Meghan turn up at the university wearing pantyhose, and this smashes another lie. Do you remember when Meghan Markle said this?
So I think probably it was different several years ago, where I couldn't be as vocal and I had to wear nude pantyhose all the time. Let's be honest, that was not very myself. I hadn't seen pantyhose since movies in the 80s.
Context becomes secondary to the clip. A full speech becomes a headline. A detailed explanation becomes a quote. A full interaction becomes a short viral moment. And from there, interpretation starts to split. Because different audiences are no longer working with the same material. Some are watching full speeches, others are seeing edited clips, others are reading commentary based on those clips. And each version creates a slightly different understanding of the same event. At the same time, attention also turned to Prince Harry's separate remarks during and around the same period.
That Meghan was so conscious of the cameras, as Hans pointed out with this one. I'm bored. Are you done already? And look, so she's constantly doing the eye blink, looking for the light, looking for those images.
In public appearances, Harry spoke about feeling lost at certain points in his life and reflected on the emotional impact of growing up under constant public attention. He also referenced Princess Diana in explaining how personal history influenced his decisions later in life, including stepping away from royal duties. For some viewers, these remarks were seen as personal reflections, a way of openly describing emotional experiences in a public setting.
There is a go-to playbook move in PR. And when you are trying to deflect from negative coverage, when you are trying to shame people into not asking questions, you hide behind philanthropy.
For others, those same remarks became part of a broader discussion about how personal history is used within public narratives, especially when similar themes appear across multiple interviews and speeches over time. And once those different interpretations exist, the conversation naturally expands again. Because now it's no longer about one speech in Australia. It becomes about how multiple speeches, interviews, and appearances connect across time, and whether they form one consistent narrative, or whether they are being interpreted differently depending on perspective.
Disrespected this country, disrespected the Queen, and the entire royal family. We don't want you here, Meghan, and we don't want you here, Harry.
As the Australian tour continued, media coverage and online discussion also began focusing more on the presentation of the events themselves. Some moments highlighted public engagement with crowds and attendees. Others focused more on tone, timing, and presentation style. And depending on what angle people were watching from, the interpretation changed. A moment that looks natural in one clip can feel structured in another. A speech that sounds emotional in full context can feel different when reduced to a short excerpt. And that difference is where most of the debate sits. Not in the events themselves, but in how those events are being consumed.
They're now calling it Meghan's misery tour, this tour of Australia, because they keep complaining about things wherever they go.
And I defer to you because you know the royals a lot better than I do.
Yes, she does. She knows one of them intimately.
Because in today's media environment, very few people experience full context in real time. Instead, they experience fragments. And those fragments travel faster than anything else. That's why the same moments from the Australian tour continue to resurface long after the actual events ended. They are constantly being reshared, re-edited, and reinterpreted in different formats. And each time that happens, they pick up slightly different meaning depending on how they are presented. So when people talk about consistency, messaging, or public narrative, they are not just reacting to one interview or one appearance. They are reacting to a collection of moments that have been layered on top of each other over time.
Even though Harry and Meghan again lied and said, we're going to fund it all, they're not. The Australian taxpayer is.
And that is what makes this discussion so persistent, because it is not anchored in a single event. It is anchored in a chain of events that continue to be revisited and reanalyzed from different angles. And from here, the conversation naturally moves into the wider question of how public narratives are formed in the first place, and why certain moments continue to dominate the discussion long after they originally happened. As the discussion continues, the focus shifts away from a single headline moment and into the broader set of claims, speeches, and public appearances that have kept this story circulating long after the Australia tour ended.
A reporter for Channel 7 in Australia, and it really does look like he has been brought in to be the chief propagandist of this tour.
Because once you start placing the clips side by side, a pattern emerges, not of one isolated statement, but of repeated talking points that reappear in different settings, interviews, and speeches. And that is where the second layer of this conversation begins. One of the most frequently referenced elements is Meghan Markle's repeated description of long-term online harassment and public pressure. The most viral version of that came during the Australia appearance, where she stated she had been bullied and attacked every single day for 10 years, adding that she felt like the most trolled person in the world. That line didn't stay confined to that event.
But look, Paul is being rewarded for his propaganda by Harry giving him this cheeky encounter.
Paul, your name's Paul, right? It's Paul. You're still smiling. Are we friends? Yes, we are.
It was replayed in commentary videos, news discussions, and social media threads, often isolated from the full speech and presented as a standalone quote. But what made it stick in public conversation wasn't just the wording, it was how it connected to other moments where similar themes were expressed. Because in earlier interviews and public engagements, the topic of online abuse, media pressure, and mental health had already been discussed multiple times.
But what we got from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle on day 3 of this appalling Australian tour was one big pack of lies.
For example, in different appearances over the years, Meghan has spoken about the emotional impact of constant media attention and how public scrutiny affects personal well-being. These themes were not new when they appeared in Australia. What changed was the intensity of the framing, particularly the use of absolute language like "most trolled in the world," which naturally led to comparisons in online discussion.
They need a lot more money. I mean, Harry's just being sued by the charity he co-founded. Let's be honest, Meghan hasn't sold enough jams or dog biscuits over the last 12 months, and everything that these two have touched has been a complete failure. So the grifters are here for money. That's all I can put it down to.
And those comparisons quickly expanded beyond just one statement. Attention began to shift toward how consistent these messages were across different interviews. In some appearances, the focus is on mental health awareness and resilience. In others, the focus is on criticism of media behavior and the impact of public scrutiny.
And Harry should zip it too, by the way, with his constant attempt to rewrite history when it comes to his mother, Princess Diana.
And in some discussions, those two ideas are placed side by side, creating tension in interpretation, because audiences start asking whether the framing remains consistent across different contexts, or whether emphasis shifts depending on the setting. At the same time, Prince Harry's public statements became part of the same broader conversation. In multiple interviews and speeches, Harry has spoken about emotional struggles, particularly relating to his upbringing, public life, and the long-term impact of losing Princess Diana.
But this appearance at Melbourne Swinburne University of Technology to discuss mental health and the dangers of social networking sites. Don't get me started on that, as Meghan's just launched one to sell her dodgy outfits, including pantyhose, by the way. Saw her tell the students to be strong.
One of the recurring points in his public remarks is the idea of feeling lost at different stages of his life, and later finding direction after stepping away from royal duties. He has also referenced Diana repeatedly when discussing how personal experience shaped his understanding of media pressure and public life. These references are often interpreted in two different ways, depending on the audience. For some, they are seen as personal reflections, explanations of emotional experiences that are being shared openly in a public setting.
A $26,000 watch Meghan wore to a homeless shelter.
For others, they become part of a larger narrative pattern, where similar themes appear across multiple speeches and interviews over time. And once those patterns are identified, they become part of ongoing debate. Because now the conversation is no longer about whether a single statement is true or false. It becomes about whether the same narrative structure is being repeated consistently across different appearances. At this point, the Australian tour becomes one reference point within a much larger timeline. Because what happened there did not exist in isolation. It sits between earlier interviews and later public appearances, all of which are now being reviewed together in online discussions.
When I was invited to speak at the summit, I wasn't sure whether I was expected to speak as someone who, despite everything, has their shit together. You don't, buddy. Or as someone who, despite what it may look like, actually doesn't have his shit together. Okay, fine, an acknowledgement.
And that is where interpretation becomes fragmented. Short clips from speeches circulate independently. Quotes are extracted and shared without surrounding context. Reaction videos break down single sentences rather than full appearances. And over time, those fragments begin to form the dominant version of the story for many viewers. Not because the full context is unavailable, but because the fragments spread faster.
Unfortunately, the mainstream media in Australia have been totally sucked in. And it's very disappointing to see. I mean, I think on her walkabout earlier in the day, Meghan looked completely snappy. Look at her assistant saying, Meghan needs her space.
This is especially important when looking at how emotionally charged statements travel online. Phrases connected to mental health, bullying, and public pressure tend to gain traction quickly because they resonate strongly with audiences. But that emotional resonance also means they are more likely to be shared in isolated form, without the full speech attached. And once that happens, interpretation becomes more dependent on perception than on full context. That is one of the key reasons why the same statements can generate very different reactions.
There were awfully cringe moments where we saw the real Meghan Markle, where she became visibly frustrated with a young boy. But as Hans pointed out, we love posing with other kids, but will not show our kids' faces hypocrite award.
Some viewers see a consistent message about the pressure of public life and the impact of online environments. Others focus on differences in tone, wording, and framing across different appearances, and begin comparing how similar topics are presented over time. And both perspectives are built from the same set of events. They are simply organized differently. Another layer that continues to appear in discussion is the relationship between public messaging and media response. Throughout the Australia tour and beyond, coverage of the couple's appearances varied significantly depending on outlet and format. Some coverage emphasized the humanitarian themes of the speeches, focusing on mental health awareness and digital well-being.
Her tender heart. Honestly, she's the meanest person to cross the threshold at Buckingham Palace in a couple hundred years, and that's saying something.
Other coverage focused more on presentation style, public reactions, and specific moments from appearances that were widely shared online. And once those different versions enter circulation, they begin to shape how future moments are interpreted. Because when a new statement is made, it is not evaluated in a vacuum. It is evaluated against everything that has already been seen, read, or clipped before. And that creates a layered perception of consistency, or inconsistency, depending on which parts of the timeline are being emphasized.
Have you smelled this? Does it smell of candy? Kind of.
Pass me the sick bucket. What used to be cute just looks awkward these days.
So as this second part of the breakdown shows, the discussion is not anchored in one moment or one claim. It is built from repeated themes, recurring statements, and multiple appearances that are continuously being compared against each other. And as those comparisons continue, the narrative does not become simpler. It becomes more divided, because every new clip, every new interview, and every resurfaced moment adds another layer to a story that is already being interpreted in multiple ways at the same time. And that is exactly why the conversation keeps returning, long after the original events took place.
First 2 days of cashing in on We Are Still Royals quickly turns back into the horrors of being a royal. It's a pathetic, broken record of constant victimhood, completely self-absorbed and never a moment of self-reflection. Odious pair.
And now, the focus shifts away from individual moments and into what actually happens after those moments leave the stage. How they are remembered, reshaped, and continuously reintroduced into public discussion long after the original events have ended. Because by this point, the Australian tour is no longer being discussed as a single set of appearances. It has become part of a much larger ongoing narrative, built from interviews, speeches, commentary, and years of public visibility. And in that wider context, new details start to matter more than isolated quotes. One of the key elements that continues to resurface is how specific phrases from public appearances become reference points for broader debate. For example, Meghan Markle's statement about being the most trolled person in the world did not remain tied only to the Australian speech where it was delivered.
And of course, this tour is about selling Meghan's outfits. So if you actually look at this website, they already have all of her outfits for sale.
It became part of a wider pattern of discussions about online harassment, media pressure, and the role of social platforms in shaping public perception of high-profile individuals. And as that phrase circulated, it was repeatedly compared with other well-known public figures who also speak about intense online criticism. That comparison is not always about agreement or disagreement, but about scale, definition, and how subjective experiences are translated into public statements. At the same time, Prince Harry's remarks across different interviews added another layer to the broader conversation.
This is the moment where she's really commercializing herself. She wants to be a lifestyle brand. She's using the name Duchess, and we saw her introduced as the Duchess of Sussex.
In multiple appearances over the years, Harry has spoken about the emotional impact of growing up under constant public attention, particularly in the aftermath of Princess Diana's death. He has described moments of emotional difficulty, including periods where he felt disconnected from direction or purpose, and has linked those experiences to his later decisions about stepping away from royal responsibilities. These remarks are often revisited alongside earlier and later interviews, creating a timeline of statements that are frequently analyzed together rather than separately. And that is where the dynamic changes, because once statements begin to be viewed as part of a timeline rather than standalone moments, audiences start comparing how themes evolve over time.
Forget changing the world. Meghan's now showing up on Australian MasterChef for a big fat check.
Mental health, public pressure, media scrutiny, personal identity. These themes appear repeatedly across different appearances, but the way they are expressed can vary depending on the context of each interview or speech. In formal events, messaging tends to be structured and reflective. In interviews, it can be more conversational and personal. In public speeches, it often combines emotional reflection with broader social commentary, and those differences in format contribute to how audiences interpret consistency. Another important factor in this ongoing discussion is how media ecosystems shape the life cycle of a single moment.
As according to Taz put it, oh my God, not the pantyhose, the pure horrors that she was expected to wear them on working engagements. How many times have we heard about it, how it nearly emotionally scarred her? Harry, Meghan Spare added, what did the hypocrites say about wearing pantyhose again? Oh yeah, that it felt a little bit inauthentic.
A speech delivered in one country is quickly distributed globally through short clips, headlines, and commentary segments. But each of those formats presents the same material in a different way. A headline compresses meaning into a few words. A clip isolates a moment from its full context. A commentary video adds interpretation on top of the original content, and over time, those layers accumulate. So when audiences revisit older events like the Australian tour, they are often not engaging with the original moment directly. They are engaging with a version of it that has already been filtered through multiple formats. This is one of the reasons why certain phrases or clips continue to resurface long after the event itself has ended. They become symbolic reference points within a larger conversation. Another element that repeatedly appears in discussions is the contrast between full appearances and fragment-based consumption. In full-length speeches or interviews, themes tend to be developed gradually, with context provided before and after key statements.
And apparently, Meghan, quote, hated every single minute of that trip. So here they are, 8 years later, they've returned back to Australia for goodness knows what reason. And all I can put it down to be honest, is that they need money.
But in short-form circulation, those surrounding details are often removed. A single sentence becomes the focal point. And once that happens, interpretation becomes much more flexible. Different viewers fill in missing context in different ways. Some assume continuity with past statements. Others see contrast or inconsistency depending on what they have previously seen. And both interpretations exist simultaneously in online discussion. This is also where public perception becomes less about individual facts and more about aggregation. Because over time, it is not one interview or one speech that defines the narrative. It is the accumulation of many appearances, comments, and reactions that build a broader impression. And that impression is constantly being reinforced through repetition across platforms. Another recurring aspect in this conversation is how emotional language influences visibility. Statements related to mental health, bullying, and public pressure tend to travel further online because they connect with broader societal discussions.
Meghan Markle attending a university to drag out this line but go much further, to now say that she has been bullied online every day for 10 years. Not only that she was the most trolled person in the world,
but once they are widely shared, they often become detached from their original structure. They appear in compilations, commentary videos, or discussion threads, where they are placed next to other moments from different times. And that comparison process becomes part of how meaning is formed. Because once multiple clips are viewed together, audiences naturally begin to search for patterns. Consistency across years. differences in wording, changes in emphasis depending on context. And that process is what drives ongoing debate around public figures in general, not just this specific case. In the end, what emerges from all of this is not a single definitive interpretation, but a layered structure of public perception. One layer is built from original statements and speeches. Another is built from media coverage, another from social media circulation, and another from commentary and reaction content. Each layer influences the others, and none exists independently anymore once the content has circulated widely. So when people continue to discuss moments from the Australian tour or revisit quotes like the most trolled person in the world statement, they are not just reacting to the original event, they are reacting to everything that has been built around it since. And that is why the conversation continues. Not because of one moment alone, but because that moment became part of something much larger, a continuously evolving narrative shaped by repetition, comparison, and time. And once a narrative reaches that stage, it does not end with a final conclusion. It keeps getting reinterpreted every time it resurfaces, which is exactly why it is still being discussed today. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to leave a like on the video. It really helps the channel more than you think. And I want to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you see this as a consistent narrative, or do you think the context changes how these moments should be understood? Drop your opinion in the comments below. If you're new here, subscribe to Crown Clash. I upload daily videos covering breaking royal updates, viral clips, and deep dive breakdowns like this one, especially everything coming out of the Australia tour and beyond. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.